Hi guys! Today we're going to talk about all the books that I read in July. I'm going to start off with the manga, just get those out of the way. I read Spy Family Volumes 2, 3, and 4 this month, and they were so cute and so good. The series just brings me so much joy. I've talked about it a lot on my channel at this point, but it follows a spy whose codename is Twilight, and he's going by Lloyd Forger. And he ends up putting together this wacky little family. He adopts a daughter who happens to be a telepath. He gets married to this woman who happens to be an assassin. He doesn't know any of this. The telepathic daughter does. And it's just, the shenanigans is great. Anya, as you see here, is my favorite character, I think, in any manga ever. She's just so funny and precious. And yeah, these volumes were just, as I said, delightful. I'm having such a fun time with this series, and I can't wait to continue it. I believe I gave them rating-wise, I think this was 4, 5, and 5. Maybe it was 5, 4, 5, something like that. But this is a very consistently strong series, and one of my new favorites of all time. Then I picked up a series that my best friend Stephanie informs me is part of the isekai genre of manga, and that is The Savior's Book Cafe Story in Another World. I think isekai is like portal fantasy. This person who's like from a normal world ends up in a magical one or something along those lines. One that is not their own and they are aware of it. This is a pretty cute story. I think these 3 volumes are the only ones that are out in English at the moment. We follow not a young woman actually, it's pretty emphasized, she's like in her 30s. We follow a woman named Tsukina who gets approached by this orb that claims to be God or a god. That orb tells her, I'm putting you in this other world to be like this world's savior. You have like infinite magical capability, but you have to learn spells and stuff. She's like at the point where she's pretty settled in life. She just wants a simple, quiet life. So she, in this new world, opens up a book cafe and makes it really homey and just, it's magical, but like not overwhelmingly so. Like she doesn't want to go out of her way to be like this world's savior. She just wants to live a quiet life, but she ends up kind of getting wrapped up in the politics of the kingdom she winds up in and having to use her powers for good. So this is a pretty cute series, very fluffy. This one was like a 4, the second one was like a 3, and then like the third one was a 4 for me again. I'm not really quite sure where the plot is going, but it's definitely a very cozy, fluffy, romantic fantasy. So this isn't as strong, I don't think, as like Spy Family, but it was a cute time. Then diving into the novels, the first one I read this month was The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. This is a very new release. It came out in the beginning of the month and I pretty much picked it up and read it right away. This is a standalone adult romance. Ashley Poston, I think, is mostly known for her YA stuff. I've previously read Among the Beasts and Briars by her, and I really liked that, so I was curious to see what her adult fantasy debut would be like, and I quite liked this one. We follow a woman named Florence Day, who is a ghostwriter for a very famous romance author. She is under contract to finish up a series of books that she's writing for this author, but she's having a really hard time with the last one because she doesn't really believe in love anymore. She got her heart broken in a really brutal way, and she just doesn't feel like she's capable of writing that happily ever after. And she's got this new editor that's like, doesn't really give her much of a break on this. He's like, sorry, like that's our imprint, like this is a romance thing, and gives her, I think, 1 more day to turn in the transcript. Then she finds out her father passes away quite suddenly and she must go home. I believe it's to Pennsylvania. Oh, actually, no, it's southern, So she finds out her dad passes rather unexpectedly and she must go home and kind of take care of family affairs, have his funeral and whatnot. And amongst all of this, we find out that Florence can also see ghosts. So she's kind of worried that she's going to see her father's ghost when she returns to her hometown. But instead, she finds her new editor's ghost is following her around. And she wasn't aware that he died in the past, 12 hours. So we're trying to find out the mystery of, like, what happened to the editor. There's a lot to do with grief and, like, the death of a loved one in this book. As I said, her father passes. That's not a spoiler. It's in the description, and it happens rather early on. So this is a romance that does have a lot to do with death. So if that's something that is triggering for you, I would maybe pass on this one, but I do think it was handled really well. Her family is even like in the undertaking business, like they own a funeral parlor and stuff. So like death is very much a part of her life even before her father passes away. And seeing her sort of grapple with that, as well as her own like romantic drama, was really good. And I quite liked this one, and I gave it 4 stars. Then from my library, I picked up Spear by Nicola Griffith. This is a novella. I had very high expectations for it. It's like a King Arthur retelling, but it's sapphic. That's all I knew about it going in. Unfortunately, I did not jive with this one. I gave it 2 stars. This is sort of like, I believe the main character is supposed to be like Percival, who is a knight of the Round Table in King Arthur mythology. And instead of being your traditional knight, Percival is a daughter of a magical woman, and she kind of lives out in the woods for most of her life, and she dreams of going on an adventure, but because she's a woman, she's really like limited in what she's able to do. She eventually goes around presenting as a man, and that I love. I think that's a really interesting concept. What didn't work for me for this was like the writing. I've never read Nicola Griffith before. I know Hild was a really big release quite some time ago. That makes it sound like it came out 40 years ago. Not that long ago, but before my time on BookTube, at least. I wasn't really quite sure what to expect from her writing, but it just, again, it didn't really jive with me. I was not feeling it. It felt very detached from the characters. Everything moved really fast. It was a lot of plot for like a 200-ish page novel, or novella rather. I think it probably would have benefited from being a full-length novel, just to have a little bit more time to flesh out some of these things. Maybe because I knew it was a King Arthur retelling, I was reading it trying to pick up on what I knew about the King Arthur legend and like the certain characters and stuff. And it's not a like one-to-one retelling. Like she goes back to like its earliest origins and kind of uses a lot of those elements, and that stuff is not something I'm super familiar with. So yeah, unfortunately this didn't work for me, but it is quite highly rated, so I seem to be in the minority here. But yeah, I gave it 2 stars, and I'm glad I got it from the library. In a completely opposite experience from that, a book I picked up from the library that I liked so much I went out and bought it is Meet Me in Another Life by Catriona Silvey. This is a book that I wanted to read since it came out. I just didn't get around to it around its release. I think it came out in 2021. Oh my gosh, I loved this so much. In this book, we follow Thora and Santi, and we're not exactly privy to what is going on at first with them, but they keep finding each other life after life after life, and they're not quite aware of it at first, but as time goes on, like, they start to realize something strange is happening, that they keep being drawn to this other person. I really enjoy sort of parallel lives, and again, like having a connection that's so strong, you just keep getting drawn back to this person over and over again, I think is a really interesting concept. And I really liked the way Catriona Silvey handled it in this book. I can't really say too much about it without sort of venturing into spoiler territory, but I think this is a really slept on book. And if you like that sort of parallel lives and like two souls finding each other kind of trope, then I strongly recommend you pick up this book. I loved it a lot, and I gave it, I believe I gave it a 5-star rating. Let me check. Sorry, I gave it a 4.5. I did round it down to 4 on Goodreads, but either way, really strong book, and I loved it a lot. Then I read a book that I've been wanting to read for a really long time as well, and that is Silvia Moreno Garcia's Gods of Jade and Shadow. In this one, we follow a young woman named Cassiopeia, and she's kind of in a Cinderella sort of situation. She's treated like a servant amongst her family because her father was indigenous, and she's just treated like crap. Eventually, she ends up opening this trunk in her grandfather's room that reveals a Mayan god of death who has been trapped there for quite some time. And she finds herself bound to him and must help him reclaim his throne in Jubaba, which is their underworld. This was so fun. I love Silvia Moreno Garcia's writing. It is so, like, just lush, and I love it so much. I feel like I'm there, you know? And I really like the immortal god and mortal person team up sort of trope. I like when it brings out a humanity in that god, and that fish out of water sort of thing is pretty fun. So I enjoyed this. I've been kind of keeping like a ranking of Sylvia Moreno Garcia's book, and this is definitely like in the top 50%. I do still think I like The Beautiful Ones and Mexican Gothic a smidge more, but I did definitely like this more than Velvet Was the Night. I just prefer her more like speculative work, and where this dealt with, you know, ancient gods and mythology. I thought this was a lot of fun. It was a good adventure story. So if you're curious about Mayan mythology, I think this is a great one to pick up. And if you just like Sylvia Moreno Garcia, I think this one should not be slept on. I know it's part of her backlist and whatnot, but it's definitely a solid read. And I gave this 4 stars as well. Next up, I got another library book, and that was Twin Crowns by Catherine Doyle and Catherine Weber. This was a lot of fun. I gave this one 4 stars as well. It was very like Tangled meets Princess Bride kind of vibes. So if you like those things, I definitely recommend picking it up. It felt like a Disney movie. We follow these twins who were separated at birth when their parents were murdered. And one is raised as a princess of this island kingdom, and the other one was raised by her extended witch family, kind of in hiding, because being a witch is illegal in this kingdom, even though the witches were there first. So awkward. And right before their 18th birthday and the princess's coronation, the one that was raised by witches kind of helps organize the kidnapping of her sister, and she ends up replacing her in the castle so that she can become the first witch queen in like hundreds of years, and she can help stop the termination of the witches. So again, this was a lot of fun. There's a bit of romance for those who like romance with their fantasy. There's a lot of adventure and shenanigans. I do think some of the more interesting scenes were kind of like skipped over, especially in the climax. Like something big happens and then we just skip immediately to the aftermath, and I was like, wait, what? So I didn't love the writing style in that sense, and I don't know if it was just because it was 2 authors kind of switching off like chapters or what, but it was fun. I do think my overall enjoyment of this book and series is going to really heavily hinge on what the sequel does. I don't know if this is going to be a duology or a longer series, but I wasn't quite sure how I felt about the ending. So I did give this 4 stars because it was a really fun time. It was a quick read. I just think some of the plot elements I'm not totally sold on yet, so we'll see how that goes. Next up, I read Persuasion by Jane Austen in preparation for the new Netflix movie. That is funny, like when I started this, I was initially very excited for the adaptation. I wanted to be prepared for it. And then as the month went on, even before I even started this one, there was a lot of really bad reviews for the movie. So I definitely went into the film with very tempered expectations, but I still wanted to be prepared to tear it apart appropriately. So I read the source material. This was good. I think I did it a bit of a disservice by, like, my last book by Jane Austen that I read was Pride and Prejudice, which is perhaps her most like successful novel. Definitely her most successful novel, actually. And it's a lot of people's favorites. And so far it is my favorite by her. I thought the balance of like the angst and the humor in Pride and Prejudice was perfect. Whereas this one is very angsty. And I don't mind that. It's just one of the things I love so much about Jane Austen's writing is how she writes humor. And that's not quite as prevalent in this book, obviously, because it's not super appropriate for this story. But in this book, we follow Anne Elliot, who is in her late 20s, and we're kind of following her as she's looking back on her life and regretting the fact that 8 years prior, she was persuaded to give up her great love because he wasn't a good enough match. At this point in her life, she realizes like that's not really important to her. Like she would have been happier with him than she has been without him. She finally gets the opportunity to see him again after 8 years, and it's a lot of angst in like the, oh God, what do I do when I see him again? And then having to be around him without acknowledging all those pent up years of feelings. And it was really good. Like I think for what Jane Austen was trying to do, like she did it successfully. I just prefer her more like comedic stuff as well. And the one thing I like really I not even took issue with, just that I didn't love about this book is like we are told that Anne and Captain Wentworth like were in love, and like no one knew her like he did, and that they were just such a good like soul match. But we never get to see that, and like not until the end when they finally like reconcile and come together do they even talk about their feelings. So I get that this is an angstier book. I kind of just wish there had been like flashbacks, because we didn't really know what Anne was missing. You know, we didn't get to see that as the reader. So that's my only critique of this otherwise very well-loved novel. But yeah, so I definitely liked this better than the movie. It was a solid, 3.5 for me. Not my favorite Jane Austen so far, but definitely a solid book. Then I had a couple more library reads to end the month with, and first up was Funny You Should Ask by Alyssa Sussman. This is a very popular romance at the moment. I feel like this was kind of everywhere on Book Talk and stuff, so I wanted to check it out, but I have been a lot more selective about which romance books that I'm buying lately, because I feel like I've just been burned by so many, and I'm kind of glad I didn't buy this one. This book is inspired by the real-life event in which an interviewer and Chris Evans kind of hit it off during an interview, and a lot of people who read this article later was like, oh my god, they has a lot of chemistry, like something must have happened. This book takes that and really fleshes that out. So we follow a reporter who is kind of struggling with her self-worth, as a journalist. But she gets the opportunity to interview this guy, this actor, who is set to be the first American actor to take over the role of James Bond. And so far, the internet and the world has had a very negative reaction to this, because he's known for playing sort of like a himbo. They don't think that he can take on the role of Bond, especially where he's an American. So she's really set up to kind of paint him in a good light and, say like, no, he's going to be a good Bond. But immediately when they meet, she's kind of taken off guard by him. He's been a very long time celebrity crush of hers, and he's a very charming guy. So they have this whirlwind weekend together in which she goes to a Hollywood premiere with him. She goes to a party at his house, and she kind of has to balance her responsibility as a journalist versus her feelings that are developing for this actor. Going into this book, we know that she hasn't seen him in 10 years, really. So we jump forward kind of back and forth in time. 10 years later, she's asked by her boss to kind of do a anniversary article about him. After a lot of angst and time, they face each other once again, and we find out whether or not something actually happened that first weekend. As I said, I didn't love this one. I think it's a very awkward position, where so much of this revolves around her doing her job, and having to act professional as well, but these feelings are developing aside from that. There's just an immediate power imbalance with her being a reporter and him having to act a certain way. I don't think that's a really great foundation to start a relationship on. And yeah, I didn't love it, and I enjoyed it, and it was a fast read as I was reading it, but the more it sat with me, the less I liked it. And I just thought the dynamic immediately was kind of off. And there also has been a lot of criticism about the author not acknowledging that real life article. I don't remember the initial reporter's name at the moment, but she does, the author of this book does not give that person credit, apparently, in the acknowledgements or on social media or anything. So that's also kind of scummy too. So I gave this book 2 stars. And then finally this month I picked up Nora Goes Off Script. This is another celebrity romance. I did not plan that. It just kind of worked out that way with my library holds. It was kind of funny reading this one after the other, however, because I liked this book so much more. I gave it 4 stars. In this book we follow Nora. She's a screenwriter, and she's typically known for writing sort of Hallmark-esque movies, very formulaic, happily ever afters. She is the one keeping her family afloat. Her husband comes from a really rich family, but he's a big idea business guy who's never had a big idea work out, and literally in their, I think, 10-year marriage, he's never had a job. So she's trying to keep her family afloat with these silly little rom-coms. Eventually one day he decides he's over this and leaves her and her family to their falling apart house that has a lot of charm and she loves, but needs a lot of work. She ends up writing kind of about this experience, and this script is a lot darker than her normal stuff, and her agent's we cannot sell this to the proxy Hallmark channel that exists in this book. She's like, I'm gonna shop this around, and it ends up getting picked up by like a big time studio and getting like big time actors attached to it. It's like an Oscar bait kind of movie. And she was like, this is never what I intended or expected. And a large part of the script that she writes has to do with this. It's called a tea house. It's the structure that actually exists on her estate, that's like her writing space. It played a large role in the falling apart of her marriage. So because that plays such a large role in the story itself, the filmmakers decide they want to actually film on location at her house. And when they do, she meets the guy that is playing her, like the role of her ex-husband. And he's basically a Brad Pitt kind of level of star. Like, he's huge. Everyone knows who this man is. But he's very strange at first. He kind of just like invites himself into her house, talks to her like very casually, and she's just like, what is with this guy? He's so weird. And after filming wraps up, he decides that he likes the place where she lives so much, he wants to stay for a couple of weeks just to kind of like take a break from being a star. And she's like, what the heck? And he's like, I'll pay you $1,000 a day. And she's like, okay. So she ends up hosting this crazy huge popular movie star at her house for a week, and he kind of tries to play like the normal guy, but like she brings him to the grocery store and he's never encountered a self-checkout before and is delighted by it. I love that kind of stuff. I eat that stuff up. I love that fish out of water sort of situation. Slowly, she finds herself really enjoying his presence. And I just think this is such a cute book. And it's really well done. Again, I think the juxtaposition of reading like a celebrity romance that I don't think was done well, and then like reading one that I think was done really well, was kind of funny and highlighted the certain elements that I thought work in that scenario, because I think that's a tricky trope to write. But this one did it really well, and it's not like super light and fluffy. It does deal with some very real world like heaviness, including like divorce and abandonment. I loved this book a lot, and I think I'll buy it when it comes out in paperback. All right, and that wraps up my reading for July. Kind of all over the place theme-wise, but I was reading a lot of library books as they came in and trying to keep up with that. I am like 75% of the way through the Jasmine Throne, but not enough where I feel comfortable reviewing it yet, so I'm gonna leave that for next month. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please feel free to follow my socials down in the description box below, like this video, comment if you're feeling it, and as always, have a lovely day. Bye.